Gentlemen, what is going on? It's a lovely day today. The weather is splendid, blazing heat, a lot of direct sunshine. It's a good way to light a fire in the belly and also just make you feel really good. I love the sunshine, something I never appreciated or understood growing up. Is that just that simple thing? The sun in the sky changes everything. And when it's always there, obviously, but when it's not blazing, when it's not shining down on you, when you can't feel its rays, your whole mood is altered. Your whole mindset is altered. And I can certainly understand why a lot of people who grow up in the north move south. And I definitely have that desire because that heat, that vitamin D, it's an absolute game changer. It makes your day just feel so much brighter. It makes you more energetic, more productive. It's goated. You need that sunshine. If you're not sun maxing, you're cooked, bro. You're cooked. You got to get that sunshine as much as you can. Bare skin. If you sunburn, it's because you eat too much koi slop. You have to fix that. I used to sunburn a lot. And I didn't change my diet in pursuit of being able to get a tan. But it just happened consequentially. And I'm a pasty, 100% European person. I have no melanin, no Mediterranean blood, no nothing. All right, I'm milk toast. But I tan. I don't get burnt. Moving on from that. Just like the sun blazes in the sky and it's a fire of energy and heat and power, so should we young men be. And this is something that's been on my mind a lot for the last couple of years because that natural fire of manhood is so lacking, so missing in young people today. And it's being revived, no doubt, and there's plenty of figures who are all about talking about this. So I'm not going to, give the whole spiel right now. But I'll just say in my own experience, I don't think I had hardly an ounce of that as a child. And there's different views about the nature of, that masculine drive and just kind of like personality archetypes. And if you're more of a kind of genetic determinist outlook, you might just say that, well, maybe you're not a conqueror type of person. If you didn't feel that way as a kid, maybe that's why. I think there could be some truth to that. I'm kind of a sensitive artist type, I want to say, but I can't deny that I have a very strong urge for conquest nowadays. So I don't think it's quite that simple. And I think a lot of it was just a lack of cultivation in my youth of that energy. This might sound like a lot of cuckoo stuff if you're not really in the know about what I'm talking about. But throughout history, men have thought about life in the way I'm describing it. Maybe not in these exact words, but everybody understood the idea that manhood is like a fire burning in the core of your being. And at its core, at the base of it, is an extremely strong desire to exact your will. Now, of course, I'm an Orthodox Christian first and foremost, and that's the primary source of my identity is rooted in Christ. And what does Christ tell us? He is very centered around submitting your will, destroying your will even. You have to destroy your own selfish will in order that it may be submitted to God, who is the source of goodness. And through him, you can do good. But without him, you can't. I fully believe this. So how do you balance this idea of this kind of like vitalist, desire, this kind of Nietzschean thing where modern man is in a dilemma where his natural desire has been taken from him. He no longer feels a strong drive towards anything of substance. His desires are much more base, and even his vices are more cucked, more pathetic, more sterile, where you have men who prefer to watch porn over having sex with a real woman, or you have men who prefer video games to real adventure, real combat, real conquest. Now, of course, most men have never experienced these things, so you can't really call it a preference, but you understand what I'm getting at. We have this kind of simulated masculinity. And it's a big term now that everyone throws around is LARPing. And I think that, that pretty much hits the nail on the head. It's role playing. It's pretending to be this thing that you want to be, but it feels unattainable in the modern world. So I want to discuss just a few things, not exactly advice, just more so my personal experience, balancing these two ideas, pursuing vitality and reclaiming desire, but at the same time, submitting that to God and looking at this through a true Orthodox, proper Christian framework. So I'm going to start this off by just showing you this painting that's not completely finished. I've never been much for painting, never been much of a talent when it comes to this stuff, but I decided I wanted to toy around with it, try to get better. And I kind of like how this is coming along here. I call this a fire in the belly. Very clear what I'm getting at with this, I reckon. If you have any idea of symbolism of it, it's not that complicated. But yeah, he's me. He's literally me. So it's a self-portrait. I hope you like it. One recommendation I would make to young men is that if you notice a lack in yourself of masculine desire, if you realize that you're kind of this sterilized person who doesn't have a drive towards anything kind of higher, who doesn't really feel the need to do anything, you're just kind of like drifting, existing, I think it's necessary that you're going to have to partake in some simulation. I don't think it's bad to live vicariously through certain forms of media. I think video games can be pretty damaging because they're so immersive and addictive. And you can really get caught up in the idea that it's like, oh, it required skill, it required sacrifice and time to get this far in the game. And it kind of has this deceptive effect on people where I don't think they're consciously thinking like, oh, this is an achievement, but it kind of feels like an achievement. And there's a lot of that in the modern world, a lot of feeling productive, feeling like you're doing something worthwhile. But at the end of the day, what do you have to show for it, right? So I don't recommend video games. If you're already in the habit, maybe try to stick with like Skyrim. I've never been a gamer, so forgive me. I'm going to sound like a boomer here. But, I like adventure games, things that are more centered around a storyline, kind of exercising that spirit probably are better than like slop, like Call of Duty and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're your own man. I'm moving away on this channel from trying to give advice constantly. I'm more so just going to say what has applied in my life and what has helped me. I was never addicted to video games, and I think that actually helped a lot. I never got heavily into it, and I think that kept me from, I don't know, I just always felt a lack. I always felt like I needed something like that in my life. I needed adventure. I needed, something like that. I remember watching Stand By Me and like The Goonies and like these coming of age stories. And I remember saying to myself, like, why doesn't this stuff happen in real life? There's never a call to action. There's never like, you watch movies and it implies to you that life is supposed to be kind of like an adventure. And there's supposed to be a moment where you're called and you have to, rise to the occasion. And I'm like, this doesn't happen in real life. But of course it does. But we don't live in real life anymore. We live in this kind of weird, sterile, fake version of real life. So that was one of my earliest memories I have of thinking something's off here. These stories imply that there's some sort of essence to life that I don't see in my actual life. And I think video games can maybe make you feel like you had that, even though you don't. What I do recommend, though, is books. Even movies, I think, can be good. I think TV shows are not very good. You know, again, here and there, whatever you're going to do. Breaking Bad was a good show. You know, I'm not saying that there's never been good, worthwhile shows, but there's such a time drain. They're so based on trying to keep you watching and keep you watching that I think they end up just not being worthwhile. And there's a real art to having to condense the entire thing into that 90 minutes, that 2 hours, you know. Sometimes it's 3 hours. A lot of the best movies are like 3 hours. But there's just more being poured into that single piece, and you can get a lot out of it in a short amount of time. And I think that is, you know, that's my personal preference, is I really enjoy movies. And I've found a lot of inspiration through film, more so than television or anything like that. Books, of course, are the ultimate form of media. Everybody is pretty much on the same page about that. It's just a matter of getting yourself to be willing to sit down and read some books. But here's one thing that might help you is don't read the self-help crap. Just don't do it. I mean, maybe when you're first starting out and you're thinking like, I want to get my life together. Okay, you're going to read Atomic Habits. You're going to read Think and Grow Rich or whatever. Fine, I guess it's fine if that's really where you're at and that's where it has you excited to sit down and just read and exercise that part of your brain. Okay. Ultimately, those things are very surface level, they're too self-contained, I think, and they're kind of like a form of magic. It's like you're not really learning what the essence of life or manhood is. You're just kind of fantasizing about exacting your will in some way. But to what end? I think that's the big thing, is you need to answer the question, for what purpose? For what reason? What's the end goal? What am I looking towards? What am I building? That's the question that public school does not answer for children. And that's why kids do not engage in public school curriculum. There's many reasons, but I think the root cause is that it's sterilized and it's despiritualized. It's secular in nature. And of course, I'm going to take the position that it should be Christ-centered. Everything in life should be centered around Christ. So if we had Christian teaching as the foundation for education, you'd understand, you'd have a context for what all this means. What is the significance of history? What is the significance of how man has related to and communicated and interacted with each other over time? What is the reason why this certain thing was bad, this certain thing was good? Not just because the teacher said so, but I have an understanding of like, okay, well, people are valuable because of this. We should behave this way because of this. We want to have our cake and eat it too, and we want to think that we can just have assumptions. We can just have, like, we agree on this because it just seems to be the case. It just seems to be the case that murder is not good. It just seems to be the case that rape is not good. We can just tell because it hurts, it causes harm. But there's no way to equivocate why is harm necessarily bad? And if it increases my enjoyment of life or whatever, then who's to say that it's wrong, right? You could go on for hours deconstructing the atheist secular worldview. And there's so much content on the internet that does that. So if that's where you're at, I'd say watch Jay Dyer. He's going to break that down for you very effectively. So yeah, I think that really is the root problem at its core with the secular education, is that there's no reason to want to understand anything about the world if you don't have that base foundation. If you don't have an idea of what's the reason for all this, how does it all connect? How does it relate to me? I find myself now that I feel like I kind of have a grasp over what life is and what my purpose in life is, looking back at a lot of things in school that I was totally disengaged, uninterested in, couldn't give the time of day for a moment. And now I'm like, oh, this is actually fascinating. Like, I'd like to learn about this. Even, things like math and science that I was very not drawn to. I was more of a creative English social studies type of student. I'm fascinated by everything now because I recognize that it's a reflection of the intelligence of our infinite creator in the very DNA, the very essence, the building blocks of everything we interact with in our day-to-day lives. And that's a fascinating thing. But when it's just cosmic happenstance, when we're just a coincidence of, on a cosmic scale or whatever this atheist nonsense is, why should I care? And that's what always kind of confounded me was these atheists that are like, I love science. Science is so fascinating. It's like, why? What's the significance of science to you? If we mean nothing and our world means nothing, why do we care to study it and understand it? There's really no reason to do so. I'm getting kind of sidetracked here, and I thought this video would be quick, but apparently I have more to say than I thought on this topic. I wanted to go through a couple of books that I've been reading that I think can help you reclaim a sense of desire and conviction in your life. Now, number one is going to be theological stuff, religious stuff. If you're on the cusp of being a Christian, I think that's where a lot of young men are today. They're kind of like, they want to be Christian, but that their heart just hasn't been softened to it yet. It's like they've come to it in their mind like, this is beneficial. I should try to pursue this. But they can't bring themselves to actually take that step and start moving towards it. If that's where you're at, I'd say you should probably start trying to read like the New Testament. You should start trying to pray. But that has nothing to do with reclaiming desire. And I think for a lot of people, it's actually going to be before you can come to Christ and lay your will down at his feet, you're going to have to learn to have a will again. Now, obviously, we all have passions. We all have a will. Like, we all want to have sex. We all want to eat food. We all want carnal pleasure. I'm not saying that these people have become like literal robots that want nothing. But it's kind of like that quote, you want to be a warrior in a garden, not a gardener in a war. I think that's extremely relevant to the Christian worldview. Our goal is not to have no desires. We're not nihilists. We're not meant to be floating through life without a care. We're meant to have extremely unbridled desire and ambition and be the burning flames that we want to see the world look a certain way. We want certain things for the people in our lives. We want to build. We want to create. We want to conquer. We want to destroy evil. We want to have this flame, and then the cross directs that flame. Christ harnesses that flame, and he points it in the right direction, and he guides it away from the wrong direction. He stops it from utterly consuming everything and burning up everything. Before I think you can properly submit to Christ, you're going to have to reclaim and find an understanding of that willpower. So that's going to be fitness, diet, and finding I don't use the term a purpose, because your purpose is to serve God. But, something to direct your energy towards, something to build. I'd say that's the real thing, is you need to be building something. The default answer today is a business. Oh, be an entrepreneur, be an influencer. That's a good idea, and some people have the personality type for that. Some people have the raw skills and natural inclinations necessary to do that, and if so, go for it. But if you can just kind of tell from the outset that it's not really for you, and you just are doing it because it's what you've been told is the way, I wouldn't go for that. I would choose a career, or even you could just work a regular ass job, but choose like a side hustle, or it could even be a hobby. Just find something that you can pour that energy into. And I'm not going to use the term your passion, because there's going to be many things throughout life that interest you. And if you're really, going at it and letting your nuts hang and exploring every avenue and just trying to see what all is out there, you're probably going to have many passions. You're not going to have one. Maybe you will. Some people do. But I'm very much scatterbrained. Like, I'm fascinated by so many different subjects, and I want to do everything. I have to make selections and make choices and cut off the things that are of less interest, or I will do nothing. I want to go over a couple books. Rough Riders, Theodore Roosevelt. I have a bigger book that's just a compilation of writings of Theodore Roosevelt. He is the American. He is peak American manhood. He is virtue, conviction, morality. Walk softly and carry a big stick. He is the epitome of a properly ordered modern man. He was some form of Protestant. I'm sure his theology was cooked, but the way he lived his life was extremely exemplary, and I am very inspired by Theodore Roosevelt. He was a man capable of extreme violence. He was powerful, but he was well ordered, and he held character and your treatment of others and just that personal moral framework was paramount to him. And he talks a lot in his speeches about, in politics, that has to be number one. And ultimately, in my view, the better way to phrase that would be that it needs to be centered around Christ, because Christ is the origin of goodness, of morality, of, anything well ordered is coming from the mind of God, from Christ himself. So in politics, it obviously is the case that has to come first. And if the moral character of a politician is compromised, everything he does will be as well. And it can appear good on the surface, but at its root, it will be rotten. He understood that, and he applied that in his life, and the fruit is undeniable. He was also an environmentalist and an outdoorsman. He was extremely in touch and in love with nature, not in a pagan way, but in a truly human way. You should learn about Theodore Roosevelt. You don't have to read. I think you can pretty easily read his writing. It's not overly challenging. It's pretty common man type language. And it's fascinating. A lot of adventure in his life lived out in real time. Stories of cowboys and fighting Indians and hunting trips, camping trips. He talks a lot about people he knew, like endless lists of different friends he had and the specific activities he did with those friends. I'm inspired by that. I love the idea that you could have a friend that's like, this was the guy who I camped in this specific place 10 times with. And that was just the thing you did with that person. He had so many connections. He remembers lots of details about these people. You could tell even though he was a man of action and he was primarily out in the world doing, he wasn't much for introspection. He still had that side to him. He still had that analytical kind of more right-brained, more creative side where he thought a lot about people. He thought a lot about their nature, and he was constantly observing. And he was selfless in that way where he saw the virtue and goodness of other people, and he expounds upon that a lot in his books. A lot of these writings, he's just going on and on about how great this or that person was. People who you have no context to know who they are except what he's telling you. And he's like talking them up immensely. That is an extremely masculine, virtuous trait that I think we all need to work on. I certainly do. I think it's sometimes a matter of just bashfulness. You feel kind of weird, like talking somebody up like that. I'm not talking about flattery. I'm not talking about to their face. I'm talking about when they're not around. Your friends, people you claim to care about and see good in, you should make that very clear to others. You should never be critical of your friends when they're not around. You should always be talking them up, talking about how great they are. And you should be seeking to understand what it is that you like about the person, because there's something there that makes you appreciate them. And if there's not, then you probably shouldn't be friends with them, right? You should choose to surround yourself with people you admire in some way. Theodore Roosevelt understood that very well. He has countless writings worth reading. I'm sure a lot of them are online. The Man in the Arena is so true. If you're looking at like the internet as the modern arena, which I don't think that's really the healthiest way to view it, but let's just say for an example, it's a perfect epitome. It's the epitome of like why hate comments are retarded. He's saying, like, you're not in the arena. You're not out here putting your neck on the line, putting your reputation on the line, putting your ego, your everything on the line to do something, to pursue something, to try to make something happen. You're on the sidelines jeering and criticizing. He was saying, like, that's the lowest form of man you could be. So true. So true. And you see a lot of that on the internet. You know, you just see these everybody's a critic and nobody wants to actually do anything. Nobody wants to actually put themselves out there. And, you know, most people are not competent, not knowledgeable, not educated, not physically capable, they pretty much lack any form of virtue. All they have is just these kind of like cheap imitations of real, refined, worthwhile people. They just kind of figured out a way to kind of make themselves look that way, and then they come out and they talk down on everybody else. And, you know, that's not what you want to be. Of course, Unseen Warfare, this is a good book. You know, there's a lot of monastic writings, Orthodox books that are extremely intense, that are going to make you feel like, you know, assuming you're a Christian. If you're not a Christian, I don't recommend starting with anything like this, because it can shake you to your core, in all honesty. It can make you recognize, like, wow, I am really not a good person. It's always kind of assumed in the modern world that you're a good person just by default. But of course, in Christianity, we have a very different way of looking at it, and we recognize that we basically think the exact opposite. We think by default we are wretched, lowly, horrible, capable of extreme travesties. And we have to recognize that in every human who ever did something egregious and horrible, there is a piece of us. And we are capable of going that low. We might not think so, but just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it can't. And we love to tell ourselves what we would do in a certain situation. Oh, if I was there, it would have been different. But it's when no one's watching and it's just you, and, you know, this is what integrity is, right? What are you going to do when no one's watching? When your reputation is not on the line, you have nothing to gain from doing the right thing. All you have is your conviction and your belief. And in our case, the belief that we will be rewarded in the next life for making the right decision. You know, are you going to do it? A lot of people think they will, but won't. And that's what the monastic ascetic life is about, is trying to ensure that when you think, oh yeah, I would do the right thing in this situation, trying to ensure that you actually will, trying to build that muscle, much like we build our physical bodies, build your soul through destroying your own passions, denying yourself, and submitting yourself to God. So I think it really does come down to essentially the path for young men today. You know, when I'm talking about young men, of course, there's going to be variation, but I think the general theme that I see played out again and again, and certainly what my life was like and what the path has been for me, was you start as a shy kind of, maybe not literally autistic, maybe literally autistic, but at least kind of autistic-ish. You know, you give those vibes, let's just say. You're kind of antisocial, you're kind of weird, you don't really understand social dynamics. You know, maybe you're kind of like a beta. Maybe you have really hard time talking, making friends, talking to girls. You're that kind of archetype. And at some point you decide that it's in your power to change that, and you're going to do it. At that point, the game becomes learning what it is to be a human and going through the steps necessary to get closer to that. Now, ultimately, I have to admit that I don't think, if it's not centered around Christ, I don't think it's ultimately human. And you won't achieve the final form worth having without Christ. But Christ is working through all of us, and if you have a truly good desire, it was placed there by God, by the true God. So even if you don't believe in Christ yet, He is still working on you if you have truly good fervent desires to be better and to do right by people, then you are starting to pursue God. So that's the beginning. And you need to get in shape. You need to get your health right. That's going to be the start, getting your testosterone levels up. You're going to start to feel that desire again. You start to long for something outside yourself. All of a sudden, it's not just about your day-to-day experiences and trying to maximize the pleasure or enjoyment or comfort. It's going to start to be like, I want to exact my will on others. And that might feel very foreign, because when you are a low T, just really like anti-masculine sort of person in your youth, and you start to feel for the first time what it's like to be a man, you're like, whoa, I am not content just to be pushed around or just to stand on the side anymore. Like, I want to get involved. I want to be in there. I want to be making decisions. I want to lead. It's not a bad thing. It's not a narcissistic or sociopathic trait that you want to lead people. It's actually a very loving thing. Now, if you desire the glory and the things that come along often with leadership, that's a misordered thing, of course. It's natural in a fallen world, but it's not natural to the deified, perfected human nature that is to be had through union with Christ. But the desire to lead is inherent to a man, because you were designed for it. You were designed to be a steward and a leader and a guide and a co-creator with God. You were designed to create boundaries and enforce them. And you have to start doing that. And it starts with you. It starts with creating boundaries for yourself and staying within them and not breaking those rules. So you got to start simple and easy and make it harder over time. And if you ever want to have a wife, you better hope that you are able to hold yourself to a standard, because you're going to have to hold her to a standard or it will fall apart. Guaranteed. And if you're trying to hold her to a standard without holding yourself to a standard, that's going to fall apart. You're not going to be perfect, but you got to strive for it. And you have to stop making peace with the idea that you're not perfect. That's another modern lie, which is acknowledging the true fact that we are all imperfect and it is basically inescapable. But then they extrapolate that to say that means you must accept it and just make peace with the idea that you're never going to be perfect. No, you must have a delusional zeal and constantly chase after that perfection. I think where you end up with a problem is when you get this megalomania where you're applying that to one aspect of life instead of the whole of life. So, for example, like you might be like a gym guy and your goal is to have the perfect physique. I don't think that's really that worthwhile, because diminishing returns, right? You get in decent shape. Now you kind of look presentable. You have like a decent frame. Your clothes fit you decent. You feel good. You have energy. After that, any further improvements, the benefit is minimal, tiny, minuscule. You basically just need to maintain after that. Maybe you want to keep improving. That's fine. But if you're hell-bent on like, I must craft the perfect physique, you're wasting your time and you're probably neglecting other much more important things that are actually lacking in your life that are making it worse for you. You have to apply this mentality to the whole of life, the totality of it. And ultimately, what that's going to look like is you have to perfect your spirit. And you can actually, you're going to need to have a megalomaniacal approach to that. It's going to be extreme in nature, because you have to denounce the world and take up your cross. You have to be crucified willingly. That's a pretty absurd undergoing, but that's what Christ has called us to, right? I want to talk about conviction. This video is running on pretty long, so I think I'm going to close it out with this. What gave me the idea for this video and made me want to talk about this general topic was a discussion I had with a friend of mine recently, as well as reading this book and just thinking a lot about the old world and the culture of patriarchy, the culture of masculinity, when we had a virtuous culture, when we had an American spirit that drove us towards something higher, that drove us towards self-sacrifice, that drove us towards courageousness, that made us do seemingly irrational things in the name of a greater good. For example, in war, being shot, being wounded severely to the point where you're dying, and instead of choosing to go to the medical tent to be fixed up, choosing to continue fighting. In the modern world, things like this, we're just like, why would you do that? That's just pointless. That's just pride. That's just this or that. At that time, it made perfect sense, and everyone would respect that choice. Or dueling. This was the discussion I had with my friend. We were talking about the idea of dueling, like fighting someone to the death with a Bowie knife because of an insult or something like that. So convicted, so sure of themselves and their beliefs and their worldview that they were willing to die for it on the spot. On the spot. Often there's no plan to a duel. It's like, we're dueling tomorrow. You said some shit I didn't like, we're dueling tomorrow. One of us is going to be dead within 24 hours. That's absurd. That's utterly absurd. But it was the norm. You have to wrap your head around this and think, maybe there was something to this, because look at civilization and society. Look at what the world that these men built, being so convicted and so staunchly committed to certain ideals, certain standards, certain boundaries, making no room for compromise. They were able to achieve masterful things. And now we can't even stick to a diet, which the end goal of is just to have abs or something. I think that's part of it, is we're aiming too small. We're not thinking about a grand vision for what we want to see in the world. We're thinking about our own life experiences. And I think that's the biggest thing plaguing Gen Z, like people who are already kind of on the self-improvement wavelength, which I think self-improvement is pretty much dead at this point, rightfully so. But you get what I'm saying. People who are not just dread maxing, people who are not just nihilistic like floaters, but actually live with some level of discipline towards some purpose. Most people are really thinking extremely self-centered, and they don't really have convictions. They just have desires. Again, that's the first step. Gain true, fervent, burning desire for something. That's the fire of masculinity, and that's what's going to be harnessed towards the good. So if you don't have that fire, you have a base problem, a foundational thing that needs to be solved. But if you have that, you want to continue to maintain and build it and make it stronger. And then you're going to have to actually fight against it. You're going to make it so powerful that it has to be bridled. It has to be harnessed. It has to be channeled, or else it's going to consume you. That's what manhood is about at its core, I believe. And young men today, we need to start thinking outside of ourselves. We have ambitions, but they're all about our direct experience. We want to see, we want access to more attractive women. We want, better luxuries, more status, better treatment, more respect from our peers. We want our peers to be higher level people. We want to achieve something, maybe like it's a big thing now is like everybody wants to compete in bodybuilding. I mean, sure, competition, holding yourself to that standard, building that discipline, fine. But that's like the peak. That's where we're looking. I don't know. Sport and things like this, they're part of a masculine framework. And Theodore Roosevelt was a sportsman. He did a lot of hunting. He was a boxer. He was a wrestler. He did a lot of different things. So it's not like I'm just saying, you got to go into politics or do something that like directly affects the world and that should be it. No, I mean, you can channel this fire into so many different things. And if bodybuilding is the thing, fine. I just don't think that it should be promoted on the level it is being promoted, because there's just a lot lacking. There's a lot to be desired with bodybuilding, and there are much better sports to commit yourself to, and much better things in general to commit yourself to. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, you got to think outside yourself and think, what do I want for my family, my future children, my wife, my parents, my siblings, my people I go to church with or school with, or my coworkers? If you have love in your heart and you care about people, you should want to see them thrive. And it should bother you to an extent. If you're a man, you should feel a call, a duty to protect and serve and improve the situation for those around you in whatever way you can. And when you see something that's totally outside your power, I think it is sort of healthy to think, I want to change this. It's not right that I have no power over this. Like, start racking your brain. What can I do? Is there any way to change this? And you'd be surprised what happens when men start thinking this way. You build empires. You create amazing things. When you stop limiting yourself based on what already exists and start thinking, what do I want to exist and how am I going to make it happen? That's when the miraculous things occur. God shines his face upon the courageous. We lack courage. We really do. Generationally, Gen Z, we have a lot of virtues. We have things that are very hopeful. We need to be courageous. We need to be bold. And we need to be convicted. This floating kind of whatever's convenient, whatever I like at the time, that's not going to cut it. Because when push comes to shove, you're always going to give in if that's how you think. You got to decide what is true, what is right, how am I going to live my life. And I'm not saying that's something you can just pick one day and just say, okay, I'm sticking to it for life now. It might change, but it shouldn't be a small thing. For your entire worldview to change, for your entire standard that you hold yourself to shift, should be a slow, gradual process, and it should be significant to you. You should be really thinking about it like, whoa, okay, I was wrong about everything. Like, it's easy for us to shift like that because everything, we built our lives on foundations of sand. Let's just think of it that way. The public school education, the modern world is completely soulless that we could see through from the time we were very young. We had the understanding like, okay, so there's just kind of nothing. There's nothing out there. Nothing matters. And we just got to figure it out, I guess. There's nothing to figure out, right? That was our underlying subconscious presumption. And as we go through life, we realize that can't be the case. So we have to deprogram our brains from that and start thinking as if, okay, what I do does matter. For whatever reason, maybe I don't understand why yet, but I can just see from looking at life, looking at history, looking at the whole of humanity, I can see that there's significance. It matters what I do. And start moving that way. I keep saying I don't give advice, but really I'm talking to myself. All right. I mean, these are the thoughts that run through my head a lot while I'm driving or while I'm sitting there drinking a coffee or whatever, while my wife's telling me a story. I'm kidding. Totally joking. Anyways. Yeah, I don't know. I do know. I got to break that habit saying I don't know for no reason. I do know what I'm saying, and I believe what I'm saying. But I think that's about going to wrap it up. This was a long one. I didn't mean for it to go this long. But let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments. Let me know what's something that you are convicted about. What's kind of a truth that you think is undeniable that you would fight for? I'd be curious to know if there is anything. And if there's not, how do you grapple with that? What do you think of that? Does it matter to you? Have you ever thought about it? I think, not everyone needs to be a philosopher. We don't all need to be in our heads, introspective all day long, like, oh, what drives me? What makes me a person? Some people just don't really have that going on in their head, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually not. But I do think, especially given the predicament we're in today, it could do you some good to consider this thought and think, outside of myself, what do I care about? What do I want to see? And can I do it? Can I make it happen? God bless you guys. Thank you for watching. Also, let me know what you guys think of this kind of format I've been doing. I like it better. I think I'm going to be way more consistent if I just allow myself the freedom just to get on here and yap. So if you're liking it, let me know. Give me a little encouragement, please. Or I'm going to give up. I can't do it. I have no conviction. Please. Please. I'm joking. All right. Peace. Goodbye. Love you.